Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Tonight is Wednesday, February 21st, and we are here at the George M. Romm Little Theater for the Finance Subcommittee meeting. Just a quick note, it is our policy that we don't normally have regular school committee meetings during vacation week, so this is a Finance Subcommittee meeting. We're here at 470 Forest Ave in Brockton. I would like to call the meeting to order, and hold on one second. It being 7 o'clock, please stand and let's respectfully salute the flag. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible,
Liberty, justice for all.
Madam Chair, if you wouldn't mind, just for the minutes, if you could just read the bottom into the record.
I was just about to do that.
Oh, thank you.
No, it's okay. I'd like to read into the record that in addition to attending our meetings in person, the public can view this meeting by way of television on Comcast Channels 98 or 1071, and also online via the link www.youtube/TheBrocktonChannels. At this point, I'd like to do a roll call to establish a quorum. Ms. Sullivan? Mr. Gomes is not here tonight. Ms. Oliver?
Here.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Here.
Ms. Azak?
Here.
And is Mr. Tim Sullivan with us?
Yes, here.
Oh, excellent, thank you. And I'm here as the chair as well, and as the vice chair, and the mayor's here as the chair.
Here.
Thank you. I'm going to pass the floor off to the mayor. He has a couple of comments that he'd like to share with everyone. So, Mr. Mayor, please.
If I could, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank everybody joining us on school vacation week. Just a couple things that I wanted to share among the membership here on the school committee. Number one, Commissioner Jeff Riley from DESE called me about 2 hours ago. Commissioner wanted to do a check-in, which I thought was unbelievable. As you know, DESE has been a wonderful partner with the district with an MOU. We're going to be hearing from Open Architects, from TJ Plant and his team. DESE is paying 100% of TJ Plant and Open Architects. But what I wanted to share with you tonight, which I'm thrilled, and I can say on behalf of the school committee, this is unbelievable. DESE is going to be paying for a school safety audit for Brockton High School. Commissioner Riley has also shared with me that they will consider and strongly support school safety audit for the whole district, meaning all schools. That's a lot of money, and we're very, very thankful for that. I also just wanted to let you know Congressman Stephen Lynch is joining us tonight via link, Zoom link. I want to thank the congressman. He reached out to me Monday to do a check-in. We spoke again yesterday. We were with each other today with the state delegation over at Good Samaritan Medical Center. The congressman took some time out of his schedule, busy schedule, to come to us tonight to listen and learn. He wanted to listen to TJ Plant and Troy Clarkson as we review FY24, which again we met 2 weeks ago with Mr. Plant. There's some serious concerns about transportation, special ed, grants, and also as we project for 25. So Congressman Lynch, I know you're on. I want to thank you on behalf of the Brockton School Committee for joining us and for what you do for our city, our Commonwealth, and our country.
Hello, my name is Tyler Charis. I'm a district representative for Congressman Lynch. I'm not too sure where he's at the moment, but I am certainly taking notes for him as we go on. But it's a pleasure to be with you all tonight.
Thank you, Tyler. Please, again, give our greatest respect and thanks to Congressman.
Of course.
Okay, moving right along, the next on our agenda is fiscal year 2024 budget deficit update with Open Architects, TJ Plant, and I will give the floor to TJ.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I just wanted to provide an update to the school committee from the last couple of weeks. There isn't a lot of changes as far as the deficit numbers. It's a moving target that we've been trying to hone in on. That has just kind of caused a little bit of not delay is not the right word, but like we're trying to really tighten it up so we can give a solid number to the school committee on what needs to happen. We've had the superintendent has had cabinet meetings, retreat the last 2 days that Troy and I have attended to talk to them about the whole cabinet, about kind of the budget issues, kind of what got Brockton to where they're at, the challenges, the internal controls, the budget process, all those things that I brought to the attention of the committee last week. There is going to be, we are currently working with Brockton Public Schools to address potentially large deficit for fiscal '24. The good news, I think I reported last time, there are funding sources that we've identified to help mitigate and reduce the gap or potential gap. And again, I'm hesitant to put a number on it because the numbers change almost daily based upon invoices that we receive and new information that comes to our attention. But there's a number of areas that we've talked about, special education, transportation, unemployment numbers are off. I know we talked a little bit about overtime, and we found out a little bit more that overtime is, everything's paid as overtime. It's not always overtime. It could be class coverage. It could be stipends. It could be other than base pay is what we call it. And that's something that we're trying to parse out because a lot of it has just been kind of a challenge to address that. I really want to, I guess, open it up for questions because I dropped a lot of information 2 weeks. I read the article in the Enterprise the other day, and I'm sure the committee has a lot of questions on kind of what is happening. And I don't know if you want me to do a further presentation because I know we're looking at fiscal '25 as well. We're getting close on fiscal '25's potential deficit. The struggle with fiscal '25 and kind of coming up with a final number is Schedule 19. I'm having trouble calculating how Schedule 19 was developed in years prior. It's about $6 million for municipal services in support of schools. We have to refine the health insurance number, which is changing based upon hiring practices and like bringing in in-sourcing bus drivers and giving them benefits, and kind of just really trying to get those numbers tight. So when we come back to the school committee to present Brockton's deficit for fiscal '25 and deficit for fiscal '24, I really want to have a path to get close to balance, if not balanced, and kind of just walk through that. And I can get into details on the sources of balancing and kind of what we're thinking of. I don't know, Madam Chair, how you want me to proceed. I can certainly get into a little bit more detail just out of the gate, or if you want questions.
No, I think honestly, TJ, I think getting into some of the details will actually promote some of the questions that we're looking for. So I would use your best judgment and forge ahead in terms of any updates that are relevant.
Sure. So right now, the deficit that we're looking at ranges, and again, hesitant to give a number because I don't need the shock factor, but so we have about $18 million of potential sources to balance fiscal '25's budget. And so if you go back to fiscal '23, you had the city council come in and balance with the 3.9 and the 14.4, and that satisfied fiscal '23. Fiscal '24, we're fortunate that there are sources out there of revenue and or grants that can help offset some of the deficit. It's going to take a little bit of work. For example, I think I mentioned there's a $1.7 million in McKinney-Vento funding that was in a revenue account in the school department. You have about $1.2 million in school choice revolving. You have the circuit breaker, which is roughly $7 million. And you have ESSER of the $5.19 million. Then you have OTPS, unspent OTPS, and of $2.8 million. That is really where the crux of the conversation that will need to happen at the school committee level on the direction that Dr. Cobb's cabinet, OA, Open Architects, and others of kind of where we want to go to address any deficits for fiscal '24. And I know there's 150 vacant positions roughly. We asked the cabinet for an updated vacancy list, and I haven't had a chance to go through the list that was sent to me earlier today to see what has changed. The ebbs and flows of what the budget could be can change drastically based upon decisions that are made between now and June 30th. And that is really kind of the crux of it, is when the number is presented finally and the path to getting the number down, I don't know if it'll get down to zero in the general fund only, because grants are still problematic. But it'll all be presented as a cohesive package or a complete package of here's what we're thinking of doing, and here's what needs to happen, and here are the steps that need to make it all happen. So you have significant deficits in transportation. Out of district transportation alone has about $3 million in deficits. The bus drivers has about $1.3 million in deficits. In-district special ed, about $1.3 million in deficits. McKinney-Vento, about 1.3, and then I know I've heard the vehicle conversation of the 381,000 overspending vehicles. And that is significant, because essentially what is happening for this transportation budget was requested was 14.4, budgeted was 11.2 million by the city council. That's the statutory appropriation, and projections are going to be where it's going to be nearly double the $11 million. So that is a significant impact to the bottom line of both the city and the school department. Then you add in special education. They, again, didn't have a formal budget from my understanding, and they need to provide the services to the students with IEPs, both in district and out of district. And those numbers are coming in the similar millions of dollars that are outside the budget. However, there is circuit breaker that we can look at for both that out of district and for school transportation. So we're going to kind of be very strategic in how we recommend the funding, or how Brockton deals with the deficits. There's other 58,000 hours of unmet needs for students with IEPs that are going to need to be provided. And I know Dr. Cobb's cabinet is working on that. We talked about individual contracts. I know that was a big part of the conversation last week or 2 weeks ago. The vacation buyback, the hold harmless clause for health insurance that goes way back to 2002, 2003, when the district failed to negotiate with the unions of a change in health insurance, and so they determined that they would have a hold harmless clause. That's typically not budgeted. So that's fiscal 24. Fiscal 25, we're still working on developing that, and again, there's $6 million in Schedule 19 costs that I cannot determine how it was calculated, and I don't know if it's just an old calculation with added cost of living to it, or if there was true math. Or normally, Schedule 19 is designed two ways. One is through a negotiated number between the city and the school, saying, here are the services the school department wants from the city and what we're willing to pay for. And that usually is like a percentage of the finance team, a percentage of the audit team, a percentage of the law department, or whoever provides services to the school department. And that usually is agreed upon. And that is totally fine. The other is you have a per pupil allocation set by DESE, and then you enter into memorandums of understanding, or MOAs, memorandums of agreement with the departments that you want to purchase service from. And so there's a level of, in my world, I have not been able to determine exactly how the $6 million was calculated. So in the health insurance, that's a big number that the city provides. So if you look at your overall net school spending number and say, oh, it's $314 million, but you got to net down a bunch of costs that are covered on behalf of the school department that the city covers. And health insurance, pension for non-teacher retirees, and retiree health insurance are the three big ones that Troy and I are working on for developing those numbers. And the swings can be big, and that's what I'm kind of trying to make sure that we're accurate before a number becomes public to the committee and to all of Brockton and the residents.
So can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
You were talking about how big the swing is. So, and I know I'm putting you on the spot by asking you this, but do you, at this point, have a worst case and a best case scenario?
I'm hesitant to put it out there because it changes. Like, I'll just give you an example. Health insurance for the last year was 31 million. The numbers I saw yesterday and today were 35 million. That's a big swing. So it's tough to really put a number on it that, you know, everyone's going to run with. I've been doing this long enough. I think I know what the public and others are going to do, and I have a tough time putting a number on it. And I know that's not the answer you want, and I get that.
No, that's fair. I didn't know if we were even there yet. And I want to be able to open up questions to my colleagues as well, because I know that they must have questions.
I'd rather do a question answer so the committee feels informed and can ask the questions that they may have thought of since my last presentation, because like I said, I dropped a lot of information on the committee a couple weeks ago.
Absolutely. Mr. Chairman?
Sure. TJ, good evening. You shared with me and Dr. Cobbs and Troy, and I think Sharon Walder recently on a Zoom, and I wrote it down. And if you could just, again, explain to the committee IDEA, and then also the maintenance of effort, because I wasn't necessarily honed in on what those meant, but it's important for us to understand those. And then also, if you wouldn't mind, again, talking about the grants. I know Trish Boyer couldn't be here tonight, school vacation week, but I know she's working, and one of your team members is also working on the grant. So if we could just get a status up on that, status update on the grant situation as well. Thank you.
Sure. So let me start with the IDEA grant. That's a great point that the committee should be aware of. So the IDEA grant is a grant from the federal government through the state for special education. And what is required for the IDEA and all federal entitlement grants, Title I and Title III and others, is a maintenance of effort. And that is the local share contribution towards special education that kind of meets the federal requirements to show that it's being adequately funded at the local level. And the local level means the state circuit breaker and the local appropriation. And right now, the FY24 IDEA grant has been put on hold while Brockton discusses the maintenance of effort issue, where Brockton is at a point where they may not meet the maintenance of effort that was filed with the state/federal government as it relates to the IDEA grant. And that is significant because that could have a ripple effect for further federal grants down the road. There's been active conversations by Dr. Cobbs and his team, myself and my team, with DESE trying to figure out what do we need to do, what does Brockton need to do in order to either correct the number, if that's possible, or make it so there's an understanding of kind of how this happened. And the answers right now, I don't think anyone has a clear answer. The problem is that grant from fiscal 24 is on hold. And right now, the fiscal 23 grant, from my understanding, is getting or charging the staff to the fiscal 23, further incurring a deficit, which isn't necessarily a huge deal if the grant gets approved and then the district reclasses the expenses to the FY24 grant. The answer is not clear, and DESE, there are typically a few ways to bring down your maintenance of effort that's prescribed by regulation and law, and I'm not sure Brockton meets all of the criteria, and that's the question we're asking is, if it was overestimated at the beginning, and it can't be fixed, like what's the solution? And I think that's what we're working with DESE on, and that's what Dr. Cobbs and his team are working with DESE I know it's complicated, and I can answer questions on that before I move on to the grants, but I guess I'll just move on to the grants and then let the team and committee ask questions. So the grants if we're fortunate enough to figure out the general fund problem for fiscal '24, the grants are still causing issues for Brockton Public Schools, and that's there's still grants that are active that are from fiscal 21-22 that have grants hitting them, or excuse me, payroll hitting them. There are other grants that are still having payroll hit against them from fiscal 23-24. Open Architects and Trish are actively working to, because it's not as simple as just kind of closing a grant. You got to research it. You got to research the expenses. You got to make sure the expenses are eligible. You got to file for amendments or no cost extensions or any of those things that need to be done in order to keep the grant money. Brockton also, in a few instances, had drawn down 100% of the grant and did not spend the entire grant. So there's a balance in munis, and that's problematic because on two fronts. One is what was reported to the state or the granting agency on what was spent on, and two, if the agency wants it back, that's a check that Brockton Public Schools needs to write back to the granting agency. And that is something, normally grant drawdowns are done as a reimbursement basis, quarterly. And sometimes you can draw down the first 10% up front so you can get the program or the project going, and then you kind of true it up by the end of the grant. And so this is could create a financial liability for the district if the granting agency don't grant a no-cost extension or don't say, yeah, you can keep it, and it's got to go back as a check to them, then that's further going to cause an issue.
Mr. Mayor, you all set?
Yeah, I do just want to recognize Congressman Lynch has joined us. Congressman, thank you very much for being here tonight.
My pleasure, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Sorry I arrived late. I did not have the link, but I'm sure I have staff on there, so maybe they can explain to me. I missed the presentation, but thank you very much. I'm just trying to understand this as best I can so that I might be helpful. But thank you.
Thank you for what you did today at Good Samaritan Hospital as well, Congressman, and we look forward to working with you on this endeavor and many more. So thank you for joining us. Tyler, your one of your aides is on as well, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Ms. Sullivan for TJ Plant.
Yes, I want to thank you for everything you've done, Mr. Plant. So you were saying that you're going to have a package for us, like what we need to do and how to move forward to put the fire out?
That is correct. We're putting together a potential game plan and options for consideration for the committee and the administration to consider on a way to help mitigate the deficit and or balance the deficit.
Thank you very much. Makes me feel better.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you. TJ, quick question with the grants, so I can understand this a little bit better. So grants that the district receives, obviously they run out of money. And those grants, I mean, Troy, you could chime in as well, they're entered into munis, so it reflects that there's funding there, or if it's not funded in there. So when we receive those grants, it's put in. So how does that carry over from 2021-22 into this year's budget? It seems like there was like a copy and paste, like because you have to physically enter those numbers into munis. Am I correct on that?
So the best way to describe it is a grant that's usually set up. They're set up with a different line item account codes, and they have a project code associated with a specific year. And if those line items are not shut off in Munis, then if there's payroll being charged to it, the payroll's always gonna run if it's an active account. And that is what's happening is, so when the grant expired, the typical process, the grant expires, you file your report, you show the programmatic stuff that was delivered for the students, and then you shut the account down and it's no longer valid, so no payroll can hit it. What Brockton has typically done is just left all the accounts open and active, so if somebody writes, that account number down as someone's getting hired, even if it's a mistake, it's gonna hit, payroll's gonna hit, and it's gonna hit the account and show a negative balance.
So, how do I say this? So we have a grant that's basically depleted, and whose job is it to actually make sure that that is closed out? If there's if there's paper trail or somebody has to sign off on it, who does that fall on?
So that's an excellent question. I think that's where the internal control breakdown has been for Brockton Public Schools. I think, generally speaking, it would be the business office that says, okay, and they would communicate with the city and say, hey, this grant needs to be shut down. If that doesn't happen and the city auditor does not know that the account should be shut down, then it's going to stay active in perpetuity.
Okay, so every year, there's different numbers that are inputted into Munis, correct?
Correct.
So if we give an actual budget that doesn't include those grants, so how is that grant still there?
The grant's not there. The line item account that is still active is there. The grant's done, closed out, and reports filed. You literally just have an account in Munis that's live and active, that somebody wrote an account number that says this person should be charged to this account, and it goes through no matter what.
So so if you look at FY '23 through Munis, there's our budget 219, and then we're going into 2024. Does that Munis just keep staying active and they change the number, or does that basically get deleted out and we input our new budget into FY '24 Munis account?
So it stays active until it's shut down. So I think the new plan, and Troy, I think I've said this to you, if not, I've thought of it, is that the city auditor should take over complete control of the accounting system to make sure. The school department should not have access to make changes in Munis and deactivate accounts and do the override capacity and capabilities that they've had. That is an internal control issue that is severely needs to be addressed. And I think this grant cleanup that Trish and I and others are working on are going to kind of help with all that. At some point soon, Brockton's going to stop the bleeding and move all the folks to an account and determine where they belong, because this is just going to further create problems for the district and the city, for that matter, going down the road. And I'm a firm believer that the city auditor / comptroller, or whatever the title is in your city, has to own Munis as the system of record, and Munis has to tie out to the budget that was adopted, and there has to be controls that show the grant came in for 4.5 million, here it is in Munis with the appropriate project code, and then here it is, it's a 27-month grant, so we have two years plus to spend it, and then it's done. And when it's done, notification is sent back to the city saying it's done, it's closed out, shut it down. Those things never happen.
Do you have an actual number of how many grants that we had total that reflected?
Excellent question. The number I heard from Trish is approximately 100 that are still kind of need to be waded through. She's focusing on fiscal 23-24. Open Architects grant person is starting to dig into 21-22 to see what's out there, what needs to be kind of done in terms of making sure that the deficits are lessened if there are deficits.
I'm gonna defer to.
Congressman Lynch, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. TJ, does that mean we drew down more resources than were made available or authorized? Is that the gist of this?
No, what they did is draw down 100% of the grant and didn't spend 100%. They may have spent 80% or 85%.
So what happens to the rest? So what happened to the rest of it?
It's sitting in an account waiting to determine if the state or the granting agency wants it back.
I see.
And then the other part of it is, they just spent the entire grant and, filed the programmatic report and the fiscal report, filed the FR1, which is the final fiscal report, and just never shut units down, and employees are just being on that account, just keep getting paid for.
And that excess resources, you're saying we didn't draw down too much? I don't get that.
No, what I'm saying is they're running a deficit that thereby becomes a city problem to set the tax rate and to certify free cash. The city's going to have to cover these deficits if the school department can't figure out how to pay them or how to solve them. And that happened this year for fiscal 23, closing it out for $3.9 million in circuit breaker, $3.9 million deficit in circuit breaker, that the city council had to appropriate that additional funding before the Department of Revenue would set their tax rate.
I see. Does this affect our ability in the future to receive grants or not?
Not necessarily. The one that does affect it is the maintenance of effort issue that we're trying to resolve with DESI, that Brockton's working hard to figure that one out to make sure, because that would have an impact on future federal entitlement grants.
Okay.
Or could have an impact on future federal entitlement grants.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate your explanation. Thank you.
Thank you for your patience, Ms. Oliver.
Thank you. TJ, thanks again for being here and being honest with us. I have a quick question. What is the dollar amount for those 100 grants that keeps going over, carrying on to the next year?
Let me see if I can track that down for the committee to see if there's what it means. I don't have that number with me right now, but let me see if we can track that down and get it to the committee in the coming days or so.
Do you have a number of how many of those grants we didn't totally use the whole amount that was given to us?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Do you know how many grants we didn't use the complete funds that was given?
Nah. I guess I'm not sure I follow.
Do you know how many grants we didn't completely use the whole grants award money they gave us? How many we still have out there?
I mean, most of them just, this isn't most grants, they've spent every penny and been very diligent spending it as dictated by the grant conditions. So I don't want to create the picture that, every grant's a mess and everything else. There are a number of grants that are just free and clear, easy to file the reports, easy to file the FR1s with the state. And there's just a few, and in my estimation, it's really more obviously it's a munis shut it down, turn it off issue, but it's also inserting the business office into the payroll process and the HR process. So the way I understand it happens is a position's approved, it gets into HR, the interviews happen, offer made, paperwork goes from HR to payroll with an account on it. HR is not versed in munis accounting, and payroll is processing payroll and getting checks out, and there's a disconnect sometimes. So if it gets entered in, it's going to get entered in, and what needs to happen is it needs to go to the business office to confirm that the position, yes, is approved, yes, it's budgeted, yes, that's the appropriate account, payroll you could process. And that is the breakdown and process of Brockton and how this is happening.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
TJ, I was just going to have a couple other follow-ups. So you came before us 2 weeks ago as a school committee when I was, chairing it, and I told you to pull the Band-Aid off. Don't hold anything back, right? And everything needs to be on the table. We have to talk about cost containments. We have to talk about spending freezes. Now, when I talked to you earlier today, after Commissioner Riley called me, you had told me, and it made me feel better, because this is not a good situation. It's dire, in my humble opinion. But you had said that you have guided other municipalities in the Commonwealth through similar things, and you've gotten them through it. So could you just explain that again? Because we have to listen to you. I mean, you're the expert. Desi brought you here to Brockton for a reason, right? And so from my perspective, I want to know, on behalf of the committee, what is it we can do? Because we're sitting here, and we only have a little over 4 months to go in this fiscal year. And, Troy and Trish have to come before us to talk about planning and prep for all 8 of us on the school committee going into the next budget cycle for '25. I said this tonight in December when I went before the city council for a bailout. The city can't bail out again. We just can't. We don't have the funds to do it. So do you mind, just in your humble opinion, giving us some thoughts? I want to thank Dr. Cobbs for his retreat the last 2 days with his cabinet. I know you and Troy have been there, you've been engaged, but what are some of your thoughts that is going to stop the hemorrhaging, number one, and bring us to where we need to be in '24, never mind '25?
So to answer the initial comment, I appreciate the kind words. I worked for the Finance Control Board of Springfield for a number of years before they were disbanded. When they were disbanded, I went over to the school department to be the CFO of the school department for a number of years because they were having their own financial struggles, very not dissimilar to, almost not identical because it wasn't as big, but similar issues of internal controls, chart of accounts. Just, the school department ended up having a lot of just financial issues that they couldn't get out of their own way. Then I went back to the city just to keep them on track, and then I got to Open Architects in Brockton as the first project out of the gate, and it's been great. But every decision that the committee and the administration makes now has a ripple effect for fiscal '25. So I know there's, no one wants to talk about a hiring freeze, and you don't have to call it a hiring freeze. You can call it strategic hiring process, because not every position needs to be frozen or should be frozen, because we've still got education. We've still got to educate the kids. But there's significant savings. If 150 positions are open, and say you fill 50 of them, and strategically, our quick math on that is roughly $6 to $8 million when you talk about this average salaries and what that looks like for Brockton. So that is not a decision that Open Architects can make. I can certainly advise of options, and I'm meeting with my team tomorrow to start developing even more options of here's what it is. I know we talked about the OTPS, 2.8 million or so. There's $2.5 million earmarked for laptops. And I know it's a one-to-one, and I would never advocate not to do a one-to-one, but that is not my call either. But that is a committee's call. One-to-one is what it is, or needs to be, based upon student learning. But these are all conversations and areas. I mean, I know we were talking the other day in the cabinet meeting, $90,000 for library books. No one would advocate not buying library books, but we're coming into March, and by the time you order and get library books, that $90,000 might be able to be put towards the deficit. And that's not saying that $90,000 will be gone for fiscal '25. And that's kind of all these little decisions that need to be bubbled up and made, and they may burn and they may hurt a little, they may cause some consternation, and I get it. But there's just decisions that might need to be made as a school committee or delegated to the superintendent and his team, saying, all right, give us a plan, and this is what the plan looks like. Because I don't want this to be an open architect's plan. I want this to be a city of Brockton and Brockton Public Schools plan that has some level of, analysis and expertise behind it with Trish and our team. And so that's what we're putting together beyond the grants. But the key part, we have a bunch of one-time potential solutions that I mentioned earlier. Those are one time. If you have a structural deficit, which sounds like Brockton does, Brockton Public Schools and Brockton City probably will have a structural deficit soon too, if they don't already. That is what needs to be addressed to start looking at the overall fiscal health of BPS.
Thank you.
TJ, I have a question for you. Going back to the individual contracts, and when we were talking about cost containment, and I know I want to make sure that I'm asking this question the right way, but would you say it's in our best interest to play the long game with this versus just thinking about fiscal year '24? Because I can't help but think that some of this is going to bleed into fiscal year '25. So if we're making cost containment decisions today, shouldn't we be making cost containment decisions for not only today, but also what we see coming around in fiscal year '25, or what could be problematic in fiscal year '25 as well? No?
100%. That's probably the smartest strategic move you can make, is making the decisions now that has a ripple effect through positive ripple effect, not positive, that's I guess a bad choice of words. It has a ripple effect to balance the budget in order to make it happen. The balance that this committee and others need to make is actually what's the balancing act that needs to happen, like for educating the students and balancing the budget and what the needs are. And I can't answer that question. I'm not in it deep enough to know the answer to that question. But any decision you make now that has a multi-year impact is an important decision to make.
And the 125-ish individual contracts, are they in your possession now?
I have received copies of, I would believe, most, if not all of them, from HR. And so I have them, and I've seen them, and I know the law department's going through them now. I know Megan has kind of taken a peek at a bunch of them to know. The key part to any of these contracts is the contracts are notice provisions. If there's going to be a notice of, termination, or a notice of layoff, or notice of loss of any benefits, or you just let them expire. But either way, that's what the law department needs to work on.
That's what?
The law department would need to opine on is what's
Okay.
the best strategy for where the contracts are, and then making the determination of just at a policy level who should be entitled to contracts and what should they look like. And that is something that I'm not qualified to make on behalf of Brockton, but that's a determination of what level of the organization do individual contracts make sense. And they're normally high up directors, principals, assistant principals, superintendent, assistant superintendents, and deputies, and all that. And that is an important distinction that should be made.
So I'm going to go back to one of our last meetings, and something one of my colleagues, Mr. Rodriguez, brought up that I kind of want to bring up one more time, and that is when we go into collective bargaining agreements, there is a very prescriptive process where we have a copy of what the previous contract was. We have a list of, of course, the asks, and then we look at what's fair. We compare it to other collective bargaining agreements. And then at the end of the day, we in the past have been told what percentage we were able to offer and it wasn't really, it was never anything that we discussed on our own. It went to the finance department, and it was, this is what you can offer, whether it's, 1.5%, 2%, whatever, hypothetically. How much of the deficit, how many collective bargaining agreements and contracts, did we approve that we really can't afford?
That is an excellent question, and I can't answer in any definitive way, but if you look at your $14.4 million contract, a lot of it was payroll. $14.4 million deficit that was incurred, a lot of it was payroll. What I can say and comment on is, as a school committee, you should have been given cost out, or there should have been costed out the union's ask, where you think the district can be, 1 or 2%, and then any iteration that comes back over the bargaining table should all be costed out and presented to the committee in executive session. So it's a knowledgeable vote of what it's going to mean to the finances of the district at the end of the day. And if there's a determination to change the salary schedule, add to longevity, you should know what that costs. If you're moving steps and lanes, like I think I noticed in your contract, you eliminated step 1. Fine, but did you know what that was going to cost to bring every teacher in at step 2? And that's all information that should be presented to this committee in an executive session as you're deliberating how to best way to negotiate collective bargaining agreements.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. Ms. Azak, please.
Thank you, TJ. It's a lot to absorb, all this information tonight. It's just a lot for us to take in. I'm sure the community is watching as well. One of my questions is, we touched base on the contracts. I know at one of the meetings we had asked for an itemized list, who the contracts are with, and the term of the contract, and the amounts. If we as a committee can see those, so we can see how many contracts might be up this year, how many might have 2 years left, 3 years left. If we as a committee can get that, that's going to really help us see when we're looking at, the positions and in the contracts that were negotiated. The other question I have is, we're in the middle of actually, TJ, is would your recommendation, and I think I know the answer, is your recommendation to hold off on any bargaining right now until we see where we are with our budget and where we are with our finances? We're negotiating. We have one
question. I don't know I actually never even asked the question where you are in the middle of your bargaining agreements, if they're up and if you're in the middle of negotiating. I think no matter what, the committee should know the fiscal impact of whatever is being presented on both sides, management and union.
Okay, because I know we're working with one group at the moment, and then another group is, their negotiations are coming up within the next few months. So as much as we need to do this, we need a little bit of direction as far as a committee, should we hold off on, bargaining with the other units until we really see where we are. We're negotiating, and we don't even know where we are financially. We don't know what the bottom number is, and we're negotiating blindly. So I just, maybe if we can take that up with our attorneys. I know we're negotiating one contract at the moment. We might just have to, put that on hold, see what the attorneys recommend that we do until we just get a little further and get our numbers down. And then, actually, my colleagues touched base on some of the questions I had with regards to the grants, as far as we're going to do things a little differently. And with your direction, we'll be able to close them out properly and not have them linger and stay in Munis. Is it something that there's like an alert? Is there some kind of an alert that you get in Munis that tells you a grant has, this is the amount of the grant, this is what was used? Is there something that pops up, like some kind of an alert in the program that tells you, this grant's going to be ending on such and such date, or these are the funds that we have used? I haven't seen Munis personally to see how it works.
our finance department and other departments work with it directly. But is there an alert system we can get that tells you when something is getting to a certain point, or a reminder, we need to close out this grant, some kind of a reminder in the system that the grant is up, we've used the funds, it's time that we start the process to close it out in the system. You had mentioned there's a process to closing it out. You can't just shut it off in the system. There's a process. So is there some kind of an alert system within the program? Or is this something that we have to keep track of? You know, when I worked at the law firm, I think we called it a tickler system. You kept track of, these are your deadlines, this is where, you know, you have to follow up. We had our calendar as to when things needed to be done. Just so we can slowly, again, this wasn't an overnight. It's gonna take us time to get through this. We will get through it, but we need the proper direction as to what we need to do. But if you have any info on Munis, I mean, I wouldn't mind stopping by and seeing how Munis actually works, see the program in person. Not that I'm gonna be doing anything, but so I can better understand how things are done when it comes to that department. Listening to someone explain it to us is one thing, but seeing it, I'm a visual person, seeing it one-on-one and how things are done within the system will make more sense on moving forward how we do things. But
So to answer the question about alert, there is no alert system. The key part to it is when you have a grant, there's terms and conditions that you agree to, and you file your reports, and you use the, now it's known as GEMS, which is the state system where all the grants go through now, and you close it out, and there should just be an automatic internal process. Okay, grants is closed out, I'm gonna now shut this account down, and it's, you know, and that's how, I don't think an alert needs to be, well, they don't have one, but I don't think it needs to be necessary if your folks are trained in a way that says, okay, I just filed my FR1, I just closed out the grant, I filed my programmatic report, satisfied all the criteria for DESI, which is mostly where all the grants come through, and now I'm gonna notify the auditor's office to shut the grant down. And that account is now null and void, never to be used again, and that's the process that should happen. It's not, what I struggle with is not overly complicated, it's just a step that wasn't taken and should have been to avoid a lot of these issues.
So you mentioned proper training. So just basic training on how to close something out, what the process is.
Yeah, or process improvement, like, you know, it all depends who's doing it. It's just, hey, mate, it might be a form, it might just be an email saying, hey, we're done with this grant, it's done, close it out, and, you know, that's just the process improvement stuff that Brockton needs to get to when we get to that point, but that's really a lot, most of this comes down to internal controls, proper segregation of duties, and communication, and basically span and control just wasn't watched at Brockton Public Schools, and you know, the amount of Munis override capacity and Munis capacity on the school side was problematic. I know Troy and his team have reined a lot of, if not all of it in. And that's just not usually the way it goes. I mean, Brockton Public Schools is a department within the city. And that, I understand the school committee's there to set policy and the superintendent and all that stuff. But, you know, the city still owns a portion of the chart of accounts and making sure that Munis is shut down appropriately. The issue that I would argue, in order to keep an eye on all this stuff, Brockton School Committee should be getting monthly, I know Troy's been doing a great job getting information to the committee, but payroll projections, expenditure projections, and revenue projections. And revenue, I actually, it's special revenue, that's more grants. And those things should, if those are done with fidelity, any issue would pop up long before it becomes a crisis. And that's, did not happen. And I'm not gonna put words in anyone's mouth on the school committee, but I'm not sure you guys as a committee saw payroll projections, expenditure reports, and reports from on all your finances, monthly or quarterly.
My last question is, at one point you mentioned, and I apologize if I'm misquoting you, but the city auditor should take over the account, so there's no override in the munis. How will that affect our business office? I mean, what does that look like if the city auditor takes over that account? What will it look like when it comes to Trish in our business office? Will she still have full control of what's going on there, or?
Yes, yes. So it wouldn't take away any functionality for the business office to run. It would just put control into the person in charge of the system of record, which is Munis for Brockton. And that person is typically the comptroller or the auditor. So I would argue their job is to make sure Munis ties out to the budget appropriation as appropriated by the school committee and the city council, and that number, that bottom line, never changes ever unless it's done through a transfer or a process that comes before the school committee or the city council, depending on who's moving money, and that'll be captured in Munis through the transfer process, transfers in, transfers out, and I think that would be hugely helpful for Brockton Public Schools, because right now, Munis still doesn't tie out. Your budget in Munis is $234 million, and your appropriated budget is roughly $231, based upon the decision to make the reductions in transportation. And I know Troy, not to put you on the spot, has been reporting on the 234 because he didn't want to touch anything until this body was made aware of kind of all the things that are going on. I know we have discussed at what point do we reduce it officially in Munis, show the deficit as being $3 million more in transportation, and then addressing that. And I think where my head's at is a comprehensive plan coming to this body, ultimately the city council as well, to show, hey, here's our best thinking right now. Here's what we think the deficit's going to come in at. Here's how we think we're going to balance. Here's where everything else is, and here's where we need to make a few adjustments. Oh, by the way, here's a series of votes or transfers or whatever may need to happen. And that's where I would say we go, and just have it as a clear piecemeal. We could do a piecemeal, but I'm not sure piecemeal will give the full picture of what it is that's happening behind the scenes at Brockton Public Schools.
Thank you.
TJ, I just want to clarify a couple things, and I can appreciate my colleague Ms. Azak's point about there being some sort of like red flag or trigger in Munis, but I can't help but think that, number one, Troy has been giving us updates on a regular basis, but the reality is those updates are only as good as what's input into Munis. And so if it's not in Munis, we're not going to know that it doesn't exist. And so for me, and I'm only speaking for myself, if we're having a problem with inputting or taking grants out, we talk about that as being internal controls, but that feels like a staffing issue to me. And the other part is, all the contracts that exist outside of Munis, again, the things that seem to be flying in your direction right now never existed in Munis, correct?
Good question. I have not, we just, as an organization, Open Architects just got front-end access to Munis. So now we're able to go in and do our own queries and pull up invoices and do some digging around on behalf of Brockton. So I can't answer that if they're in Munis. My guess is probably not, but everything should be scanned in.
Okay, thank you. Congressman Lynch?
Yeah, thank you. Just one observation, that whole system with Eunice and just like I've got 18 towns and 3 cities, and there's a lot of turnover in some of these offices, and I'm not sure the training, this is sort of an accident waiting to happen if people aren't trained on this and keenly alert to, some of the pitfalls that might result of just not constantly monitoring this. So I'm just wondering out loud if there's some way systemically, as one of my colleagues asked, is there some type of alert that might come out? That's just my observation. There's got to be a better way to do this and to catch this before it becomes a problem. The question I had for you, TJ, I know you do a lot of this, and I really do appreciate your guidance on this. But in the other cases that you've seen where there's a shortfall, for various reasons, have you ever encountered a situation where, federal resources might be injected into the system? Is there a pool of money that I might access that might help the situation? And, I'm just, I'm trying not to recreate the wheel. I usually have to try to match up a pool of resources that people are eligible for. And it has to, I've got to get it through appropriations, I got to get it through committee. And I'm just wondering if you had any recommendations where that might have been done in the past rather than me trying to recreate the wheel.
So that's an excellent question. The mayor asked me that same question this evening, earlier this afternoon, saying, is there any way Congressman Lynch can help? And I'm like, a lot of the money that comes in are entitlement grants through a formula. So but let me give it some thought. And
but TJ, so we have earmarks, right? So that's why we're doing the pool. The mayor wanted the pool done, so we injected a few $1 million into that. I think Senator Markey or Senator Warren pitched in as well, and so I have some discretion there in terms of where to direct the money, and I just want to make sure, because everything is so formulaic here. The programs, the grants, there's usually guardrails on these things, and I'm just trying to think of a way that I might get some, federal money and just with my discretion. Obviously, it has to be a 501c3 or something like that, and I'm sure we qualify in this, Boston Public Schools qualify. I'm just trying to figure out how to make that happen and make it happen quick.
Yeah, let me give it some thought, because there might be, if we're thinking earmarks, there might be some areas we can actually get some language on very specific for Brockton's needs.
Even if I were to pay for something that you were going to have to pay, meaning
Correct.
Boston Public Schools, if I can find something eligible for me to pay for, that reduces your outlay and it generates savings. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to think along those lines, and then just try to get this on a, go forward basis so that we eliminate that structural, if possible, with all our work together, eliminate that structural deficit, and get us on a good glide path. That's sort of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, let me give it some thought and regroup with the administration and BPS and see if there's a couple of things on their radar that might actually be helpful for that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Ms. Azak?
Thank you. Actually, this question is going to be for Mr. Clarkson. We're looking at the finance report that you gave us, and the last meeting we had, we were given, and it wasn't you, we were giving some paperwork with outstanding invoices that were probably almost 2 years old. And on this report that you're providing us, are there areas that you're not seeing bills come in that we can actually reach out to them and say, we haven't seen any invoices, we need to update our finance report? I'm just throwing it out there. Say there's I don't know, medical school where we normally would get invoices or something. Is there a category here that the numbers are not changing? I don't have the previous reports to try to compare them, but do we have any categories on here that we haven't received invoices in quite some time, like months, that we can look at and say, listen, we haven't received anything. we need to see where we are, because looking at these and not seeing an updated number, like a year to date, I might look at them and think these are updated, but what if I had a company and I haven't submitted an invoice in months and I'm just waiting, maybe I do it quarterly, maybe, a couple times a year, depending how much business I do with the district. Am I making sense as far as my question? Like, I'm looking here, but I'm just seeing, like, I see some of the items that are highlighted in yellow and in red, but when was, for example, like, I don't want to throw anyone out here, but just, if there's someone that hasn't submitted an invoice, for example, the one at the last meeting, it was almost 2 years, and they're submitting their invoices, and it's like, we need to close out our invoices. We need to see what's outstanding and what's to date, because these numbers, to me, are not going to be accurate if someone hasn't submitted their invoices for months. So that's, we can look at this, but I just don't think our percentages are going to be correct. And if there is an area that's on here that hasn't, if we can reach out to them and just say, listen, we're trying to figure out our numbers. We need to get updated invoices. You might not do your billing. Maybe you do your billing quarterly, monthly, maybe every couple of months. But get us your invoices so we can get a better understanding as to what we owe when it comes to figuring out our budget, figuring out what we still have and what we have to work with for the next 4 months. So
I would answer that in two ways, because I think there are two classifications of bills and invoices that are out there that we're quantifying and paying. The first is the general vendor invoices, as you describe. And we made an effort recently with the collaboration of Dr. Cobb's. One of the requests that TJ and I made was to fan out to the departments and the departmental leaders to try to ascertain what, if any, outstanding invoices there were. So we've taken that step to try to get departments to submit any invoices that they have, to encourage vendors to submit invoices. And so I'm confident that generally, I mean, you never know if there's an exception out there, but that the district leaders have done a good job to try to pull out that information. There is another set of invoices, though, and we've talked about it from time to time in these meetings. I think one of the challenges that the district and the finance office had was in procurement. And so there are some instances of contracts that were not properly procured, or contracts where there was a not-to-exceed amount that was then exceeded, where we have invoices that cannot be paid because either the company exceeded the amount that they were contracted for, or there are other issues. And so we've quantified those, and we know what those are. The law department has been very helpful in working with Dr. Cobb's in the business office with the support of me and TJ to try to find out how best to address some of those. But some of those issues may take some time to work out. I'll also answer, though, the question, Member Azak, to you, and the question or the point that was raised by the congressman. One of the overarching issues that we've seen is a lack of documented workflows and the formalization of processes and formal written policies on how to do the basic business of the school district. So one of the goals must be to institute those formal written policies and formal written workflows, because the congressman is absolutely correct. We all know, not just in the Brockton Public Schools, not just in the city of Brockton, but in general, it's challenging for us to recruit and retain employees. So the best prevention for mistakes when you have that turnover is to have processes that are formalized and well documented, so that when a new person comes in, as Congressman Lynch suggested, they can be trained, and there is a documented way of doing things. And historically, that has not been the case. And so with invoices and vendors and everything from payroll to the process TJ described about hiring and how you involve and engage the business office, probably the most important thing outside of solving the actual budgetary issues is creating that formalization to the business of the Brockton Public Schools, because that's the long-term solution to a lot of these challenges, is having processes that any of you or any member of the public could ask for and understand how the district does business.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
TJ, I just had a question for you and then a question for Troy. So when you came before us several times, you would express that you had never seen overrides on Munis. It's unique to Brockton, and it's a recipe for disaster. Just 2 weeks ago, you shared with us you had never heard of or seen a 199 account. And I'm wondering, since we last met via Zoom, where are we with those 199 accounts? Because I think that's extremely important to get an update on.
So, great question. The 199 account is something that is the default for a lot of payments that are not budgeted in specific schools, overtime, class coverage, stipend, anything that doesn't get covered by a budget on a grant or something else defaults immediately to the 199 account through payroll. And that's something that probably needs to be investigated a little further with Troy and OA, and because I think it's dangerously close to running out of money. And I think I mentioned this in the last meeting, is that, I obviously years ago, $100 million plus was put into the account and moved out as needed. And now, I don't know, I have to look at the balance. But I know I spoke with one of the accountants in the business office, and they said they're nervous that, when payroll runs, there's going to be issues in the 199 account. And that is something that needs to be cleaned up, and I think it needs to be cleaned up in fiscal 25, possibly even cleaned up in fiscal 24. It's one of those accounts that's next to impossible to track expenses related to a location and to all the central office staff, everything just reverts to this account, and it's just one of those. I mean, Dr. Cobbs asked me when I first started, can you let me know kind of the overtime? And we're running overtime and it's not coming up, and then come to find out it's all hitting the 199 account. And it's just interesting. And I mentioned overtime. Brockton treats overtime just as a catch-all for anything outside of salary. So that is an important distinction to make, that, I know I mentioned it earlier, but I wanted to repeat it. But the 199 account is a challenge. It's tough to figure out what's going to hit it at any given time. And it's one of those accounts that we don't even know. I can't figure out who's coded to it, and I don't know how. That's a process that I need to dig into and figure out, is this a manual process that people are writing 199 on their overtime slip or writing 199 on their class coverage slip because they have no idea where it's supposed to come from because they don't have a formal budget? Those are all questions that Troy and Dr. Cobbs and the team are grappling with, is like, how deep down this rabbit hole are we, with this account, where it's like, I just literally I've never seen anything like it. I don't know, like, all of a sudden one day payroll hit, and next thing you know, like, where it's, the account's drained more than we thought. It's impossible to be checked off of. And that's where the struggle comes in, going back to not giving a full number, not because I don't want to, but literally, it's a struggle because you don't know week in, week out what's gonna hit that account. And it's one of those, you can write that in an account and it's frustrating on our end, but I don't know. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
No, it does, and before I get to Troy, because it's a question I want to ask about overtime, but did I hear you correctly when you were talking a little while ago that you and your team just got access to Munis? Like, and why was that?
So Open Architects has access to back-end units, and I don't need to get into the IT. The IT department's been great. We have access to your data, and we've been using it from day one. The issue we have is that we wanted to run our own account inquiries and year-to-date budget reports and see what invoices and what, to do our own kind of, let's flag some stuff that seems weird and investigate and then ask questions. And, so we're doing a lot of that now as a team on behalf of Brockton. Is if we see a red flag, we're going down and we're looking at it and asking questions of the appropriate departments and appropriate folks to make sure that, everything makes sense. Our key is, services rendered, goods delivered, everyone signs off on it, everyone's happy, and bills are paid. And to get to Troy's point earlier, there have been a number of procurement issues that are popping up in the public school system, and contracts that have been entered into that are not appropriately procured. And an issue that Troy and I have been talking about is, I would argue, Brockton Public Schools, we need to go back to encumbering funds against contracts and against areas. I know that was done away with at some point. I don't know the exact details, but the key part, we're getting invoices that are surprising us, or that are a surprise. There's no way $500,000 worth of dumpster fees should be a surprise. Like, that is a contract that has been entered into, services rendered, all that stuff. And that's the stuff that's popping up that's making it difficult to project out for that. And there's just a number of just issues that keep popping up that we're not aware of, that we just keep adding it into the projection and just to have the conversation. And I think for fiscal 25, I think we should encumber the funds. Utilities should be encumbered. I mean, I get nervous that utilities aren't fully encumbered, that we're going to get, Brockton's going to get bills that are not budgeted and throw everything off again. So I don't know if that answers your
No,
question.
that does. I was just concerned that perhaps someone was blocking you from Munis, but that wasn't the case at all. You just took some
No,
time.
your team, the team has been great.
Okay.
Both the school and the city team, hands down. As soon as we said what we wanted and we clarified, Open Architects got
Okay.
it, and it's like, it's definitely, it's gonna be a help. It's gonna be a addition to the staff. I mean, right now you have one business office staffer and an accountant and Trish. Then I have two analysts that have been on some calls, plus me, and that's, the augmenting the staff in order to kind of help Brockton Public Schools get to where they need to be.
Thank you. My last question is to Mr. Clarkson. Troy, 2 weeks ago when TJ came before us, you couldn't make it that night, but after he spoke, this body took a vote, and we took a vote directing the acting superintendent, Dr. Cobbs, not to spend overtime unless it was mandated, and that was the caveat, unless it was mandated. Since then, again, it was only 2 weeks ago, but have you seen any beneficial results to that, or where are we on that endeavor?
So TJ and I attended over the last 2 days the morning version of a cabinet retreat that Dr. Cobbs held with his cabinet members. And it was very, very helpful. And I'm using this to answer your question, Mayor, just so you know. It was so helpful, I think, for all of us that we committed to attending that cabinet on a regular basis, because the level of detail that we were able to get into with the cabinet members, I think helped TJ and myself better understand the operations of the school department, despite the fact that we've both been involved for several months now. And one of the issues that came up in our discussions was overtime. So one of the issues with the Brockton Public Schools and the way people are paid, as you all know, particularly teachers often perform services for the district outside of their teaching duties, and in the contract are compensated with stipends or additional pay for additional duties that they undertake, right? And those are wide-ranging, from a drama coach to an athletic coach to mentoring. There's all kinds of things that employees in the district do. Generally, there are things called pay codes that describe how those people are compensated. The way the payroll, as I understand it, the way the payroll has worked here in the district is that most, if not all, compensation outside of regular compensation is called on a pay stub overtime, although it is not legally overtime. So there was a concern, I think, amongst the cabinet members and the staff and educators that the vote of the school committee was cutting out all of those extra things that the employees do, which of course was not your intent. So what I think, I know what TJ was addressing was overtime in its truest sense of the word, that was contained in some of those one-on-one contracts where exempt employees, meaning salaried employees, were also being paid overtime. And so that was the objective, to limit those. And yes, that's a very long answer, but I think a necessary one to clarify some of the misunderstandings. And we discussed that during the cabinet meeting with Dr. Cobbs, and those true overtime costs have been reduced significantly, if not almost eliminated, and only with the specific approval of the superintendent are those costs incurred. I don't have actual numbers for you, Mayor, but we can certainly get those.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Azak?
Thank you. Actually, the mayor had answered the question I had. TJ clarified it. I just wanted to make sure that TJ had full access to whatever he needed and his team while they were at Brockton, at BPS. So it was clarified. Thank you, though.
Thanks. Ms. Oliver?
TJ, just to piggyback from the mayor question regarding the 199 account. So somebody's been taking money out of that account to pay salaries. Do we know who's been managing that account?
I don't know if it's being actively managed as opposed to just monitored, if that makes any sense, where there's money in it and that's the default account for everything. So I think the general sense was we're not ready to break it because we don't have a fix for it. If that, I don't know if that makes sense, but like, I'm not ready to break the 199 account because we're not ready to have a solution on where all this payroll should be going.
I agree,
that
but do you know who has access to it at this moment to pay out those salaries?
It's not access. It's not an access question. I appreciate the question. It's not an access question. Like, there isn't somebody going in and spending out of it. It is the default account for virtually all spending that doesn't have a line item or budget associated with it.
Okay.
If I could just follow up, in addition to what TJ said, I think the solution to that is a detailed budget passed by the school committee where the actual costs for the operation of the school district are reflected in the vote that you take in adopting the budget, and then what is ever in munis is reflective of the budget that you passed. And so the solution to that is an FY25 budget that is very clear about where the cost centers are, where your priorities for spending are, and how we account for those. And so we talked a lot to the cabinet over the last couple of days, particularly today, about that very topic. So we're going to do a lot of work, the we being TJ, me, and our teams, to then do a lot of work with you as we approach July 1st to try to put together an FY25 budget that eliminates that 199 account and actually represents the costs of running the district.
Thank you. I have another question. Regarding the contracts, I'm glad somebody got hands on them. We asked for it, we haven't got it yet. What are those positions, those contracts that you see?
It's a range of positions throughout the organization. I think it became a kind of a new cultural thing that everyone wanted a contract. It's a tough answer. I mean, they're at all levels of the organization, from accountants all the way up to, superintendent and others that they're legally bound to have a contract. It's just the low-level positions that it's just the employees at will have contracts with the benefits associated with them. And as I mentioned last time, they're vaguely written. They reference terms in other contracts as benefits, so they're open to interpretation and what's available. And our best estimate, as I mentioned before, is $2.1 million for vacation sick buyback severance. And for those to be open to just anybody that has a contract and not budgeted is problematic for the district of trying to plan. Because I could think of $2 million going to other stuff that educates kids and provides better education for students and provides more resources to the district than necessarily a vacation buyback program that I guess, great for the employee. And I know the employees are probably going to be thrilled with my comments, but it's something that really should be reined in and held for the top executives and the principals and other major positions within the district, in my opinion.
Do you know what's the overtime rate on some of this contract? Is that written in there?
It's time and a half of their hourly rate. And I don't know how it's interpreted. I mean, it could be, FLSA, Fair Labor Standards Act, pretty clear on, when overtime kicks in and, 40 hours and then it's time and a half and, has to be worked and then approved by a supervisor and, and all that stuff and making sure that all that. And, so if you're talking one of the salaried employees or a salaried employee that makes a lot of money getting time and a half at the hourly rate, that's pretty significant. And I can run some calculations on some of them. I'm not going to call anybody out in particular, but there's just a number of salaried employees making significant overtime at an hourly rate. If you think of overtime in the purest sense, it's for, a custodian who, comes in on a Saturday to remove snow, or a Sunday to remove snow to get ready for school or whatever. They're hourly, it's in their contract, it's something that you need to pay. If you're a salaried employee, the hours are supposed to be the hours necessary to do the job. And if the job is 80 hours a week, like most of us are working these days, it's the salary, it's the salary, it's the salary. If you happen to be fortunate to have a quiet week where it's 30 hours, it's the same salary. And that's where the interesting piece of these overtime parts of the contract come in.
Yeah, if you can get the number for me, that would be great. You don't have to call out anybody, but just to give us an idea of what we've been paying out. Thank you.
Ms. Azak?
Thank you. TJ, actually, those that are watching are having a hard time hearing him. If he can either get a little closer, if they can raise the mic a
Sure.
little. I told him that he's on Zoom, so he's not actually in the building.
I'll turn it up. I probably should buy a microphone that's a little bit better than the laptop issued one.
Okay. Yeah, just so they, I mean, those that are watching.
I'll speak louder. Does that sound better if I speak
Ab-
like this?
I think so. We can hear you clearly. I think it's those that are watching. Thanks,
Okay.
TJ.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez?
Thank you. I have a few questions. Number one, when it comes to I know our legal counsel is here. When it comes to the one-on-one contracts, as far as requesting to view that, I do not feel comfortable receiving that. I think if there's possible for us to convene at a time, possibly an executive session, so that doesn't stay in any member's hands, because those are people's livelihoods that we're dealing with, and I don't want none of that stuff to be made public of what their contract actually is. We definitely need to see these contracts and review this as a body to see where we can mitigate and how to fix that. When we come to the grant aspect of approvals and non-approvals, TJ, have you seen any grants? Because every grant before it's accepted has to be approved by this committee. The reason why I'm asking that question is I know there was a grant that was postponed, and I specifically made a request because when I went back and I reviewed a lot of the grants that was coming before the school committee, a lot of those grants weren't breaking down. It was just a number, and this is what it's being used for, but I wanted it to be breaking down if it's for salary, if it's for supplies, XYZ, if it's paying for somebody's full salary. And I know there's a grant that this body did not approve, and it listed individuals' names on that grant that were going to be hired. And I know these individuals are working for the district. So now, this body didn't approve that grant. Did that give us a little bit more of a deficit? And if it didn't, where are those funds coming from to pay these salaries? So do you have any knowledge of grants that weren't approved, that was entered into Munis? Or is that something that you would have to go back and review on the school committee meetings to see which grants were approved and not approved that were actually put into Munis? It's kind of crazy.
If you could email me anything you know about the grant for us to look into it. So I've been with Brockton since September, whatever, 25th or whatever the first day was. And there is not a grant that I'm aware of that has come in that has not been properly brought before the school committee for acceptance. So it may have been prior to that, if it was, because I know Troy and I committed to bringing all new grants to be accepted by Chapter 71, whatever. I'll have to get the citation, but there's a legal authority for this body to accept all grants and authorize the expenditure of the grants. And part of that acceptance would be a budget that says salaries, wages, supplies, materials, and capital or otherwise.
Okay, yeah, that was one of, we're looking at grants and what's approved, not approved, not being closed out. I personally know because I motioned to postpone that grant, and looking at having individuals hired, we're trying to fix this, things happened. But the other thing that I wanted to mention is that you stated that people didn't know what their budgets were. That bothers me because when I have the budget book here, so when I look at, specifically the athletics department, FY23 was $1.1 million approved. 24 is 1.1. It stays consistent, but it's broken down. Fall sports, what's allocated, winter sports, what's allocated, middle school sports, what's allocated, equipment, it's broken down line item to line item exactly. So this is the budget that the athletics has. So if I go to the AD and I said, what's your budget? This is public knowledge. And for you to tell me that you don't know what your budget is, you just submit it and it goes to the business administrator. I'm just trying to see where the disconnect is. If we vote everything is line item, everybody has a budget. You can't say nobody has a budget. Whose job is to, do they not tell them? Do they not know? Who's not educating? They have to know they have a budget. Like you look at the custodian, it's the same thing. Every department, everybody has a line item. For somebody to say they don't know what their budget is doesn't make any sense.
That is probably the premier question that I've been grappling with the last, 5 months or whatever long it's been, is I don't understand why Munis doesn't match the budget book adopted by the school committee. And actually, that's an excellent question to ask the athletic director, what do you think your budget is? Because I can tell you, when you look at the 199 account, there are coaching stipends hitting that account that are probably not hitting the athletics budget, and it ranges from $600,000 to $800,000 roughly a year, and it's not all on 199, but there's a lot of miscoded budget items, and that is where I think the fundamental breakdown for Brockton Public Schools is at this particular moment, where if you talk to the special ed department, you talk to transportation. I did not have a conversation with the athletics department. I think that would be kind of a nice, telltale, like, what do you think you have in order, like, not just equipment. And you're not worried about the coaches because the coaches are being paid out of 199 or some other account. I don't have the answer to that, but I think I actually want to ask that question tomorrow to see what they would say to that.
Yeah, it's every department, and that goes back to my question when it's, going back to Munis, it's when you tell me that it's not reflecting, it's telling me that somebody or whoever's job it is in finance, it's a team, that they're not actually inputting it properly, and it's just like to me, it seems like there was a cut and paste. Took one year and put it to the other, and it threw everything off whack. That's the way that I'm seeing this. Tell me if I'm wrong, Troy.
Well, so I think TJ is absolutely correct. This is something that is a challenge. It's confounding to us on a daily basis. If you look at the reports that we provide you, that's an actual reflection of what's in Munis. And if you compare that Munis report to the budget book that you have, there is no direct relationship between those two sources of information. That's a challenge. If you look at the budget book for the city and then go into Munis, there is an identical match between what's in that budget book and what's in Munis. And so one of the things we need to do moving forward, again, in FY25, and we talked about this at the cabinet level today, because I think the staff, I think in their defense, weren't provided information that even they understood the discrepancies between what's in Munis and what's in that budget book. To further complicate things, but this part is not abnormal at all, your actual legal budget is the budget that you vote as a school committee. And you don't vote a budget in that level of detail. And there's a reason for that. I don't know of a school committee or a town meeting or a city council that does. Because if you actually voted your budget in that line item level, you would spend every meeting moving money around, right? Because that's necessary. That's how a budget works. But I do believe that your voted budget can be much more specific and detailed than the 4 lines. The actual budget vote that you took last June was 4 lines. And so, that provides a lack of detail and specificity that's a real problem. And so our goal needs to be collectively to have consistency, that when we come before you in June, exactly what you're voting on, And then the follow-up is that whatever that is reflected so that those update reports you get reflect the spending on the priorities that you identified. And that seems basic, but I think we've identified that as one of the critical breakdowns in the process.
But just to pick it, when you say, we voted on 4 line items, but those line items in our budget book is broken down to equate to that budget, to those 4.
Oh, absolutely,
So what I'm
yes.
saying is just that, like, regardless if we voted just one big number, but it's broken down per department, this is what you have, it's right here.
Right, yeah.
It's right here. It doesn't make sense when somebody tells me they don't know what they have in their budget, and then I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. I'm reading it right here, like, it doesn't make any sense to that notion, but it's more of, when you tell me that, finance, I mean, these people are professional finance that work in that office, I hope they are. I know it's depleted, I question that as well. But when we look at 23, there was 18.2 that the council bailed us out. Are we accurate with that number? Is there anything that's gonna pop up? Are we certain that it's not something's gonna come down the line next week or within the next 20 minutes after this meeting that it's jumped up another 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 million? Are we accurate with that number?
For FY23, yes, absolutely. That year has been closed out. The challenge that we have, as TJ described, is, so when he talked about those grants, if you look at the city's free cash calculation, which I can provide to you, it's also available online, we took hits against our free cash, meaning the city fronted the money to cover some of those additional funds that were in a deficit. And so one of the things TJ was talking about here today is what we need to do is close those out, but close them out by providing funding to them. You can't just take a fund that's in a deficit and say, "Good, we don't need that anymore." But one of the challenges is that there was money existing in some accounts that could be placed, that's not the right word, that could be used to cover some of those fund deficits. But that's painstaking work that TJ and Trish, even with the support of some of my team, are doing. So I think we are getting a very good handle on where we're at for 24. We've identified potential solutions to meet some of those challenges. But again, one of the things that we talked about at the cabinet meeting today is there are some structural issues, right? Requirements that you have as a school district to provide, and we have some challenges to be able to meet those. Now, one of the things that I said at the cabinet meeting, and I've said it to you and I'll repeat it, the mayor and I met, as you know, regularly with the superintendent and the school CFO. And we talked often. And every year since Mayor Sullivan has been mayor and since I've been CFO, we have provided in the city's budget the amount that the schools asked for net school spending. And then with the credits that we get under the Schedule 19, and that is, to further explain what TJ was talking about, that is, for instance, the costs of employee health insurance for school employees is reflected in the city's budget, but it actually provides a benefit to school employees and to the school department. So our overall educational contribution is well beyond the number that the city council votes to provide to the schools. But I think the conversation that we haven't had, and this is the big we, folks, is what is that number that's really needed for the school department to do its work on an annual basis. And we've got a lot of other stuff on our plate. But that's a conversation that we need to have so that we're projecting not just to 25, but to 26 and to 27 and beyond, and really trying to understand what resources are needed for the Brockton Public Schools. Because there's that discussion, I think, has been held in small groups. The mayor and I certainly have had discussions on the city side about what's needed long-term. But I think one of the many, many items that's on our plate is to really start taking that long-term look and trying to understand what resources we need, because then we can work with DESE and the legislature and Congressman Lynch and other sources to really try to understand long-term, because this isn't a fiscal year 24 or a fiscal year 25 problem. This is a long-term problem that we need to address that, frankly, I think was masked by the federal COVID aid that provided the opportunity to sort of cover up some of those structural issues because there was a lot of money flowing in. But now the Band-Aid, as the mayor said, the Band-Aid has been ripped off, and the challenge exists for all of us to work together to try to solve some of those long-term problems. The first step in that is having an FY25 budget that's transparent and that's clearly understandable, not only by the school committee, but by the general public.
Thank you. TJ, right now, 2024, I know you still calculate your numbers. Today, Wednesday, what is the actual deficit number that we are looking at right now?
It's a tough one to give a number on. But
I know you're still working on it, but what number do you have presently today?
North of 15 million.
$15 million deficit? Is that what you're saying?
North of that, yes.
North. So I could round that up to 20. Or should I go above
I'm not
that?
gonna put a number on it, but it's significant. The key is there's numbers out there that can help bring the number down. There are one-time balancing solutions that Trish and I can employ, and Troy and I can employ to bring that down, as I've mentioned before. But it's a structural problem. It's probably comparable to other years that Brockton has seen I don't think I understand the fiscal 22 stuff, and I don't know if that's for me to understand anyway, because I don't want to go back retrospectively, but I've heard stories about fiscal 22 having a problem. I certainly am very well aware of fiscal 23, and what we're looking at for fiscal 24. The numbers can be big, and they swing every day up and down, and that's where the decision of this committee needs to be: what do we do in terms of bringing these numbers down? And I'm hopeful in the coming week or so that I can present a package along with Troy and Trish of what the path, I call it path to balance, or a path to and then I want to present fiscal 25, at least the governor's budget, because we know what the governor's budget is, and just hone in on the numbers that Troy was just talking about. So, but it's significant.
So it's fair to say that FY24 deficit is a lot more than 23.
I don't know if it's difficult one to answer, because that's general fund only, and the grants is, as I mentioned, a critical part of this conversation. I don't want to rehash old wounds, but CARES Act, that's nearly $4 million that is still looming out there. And the conversations that we need to have is, okay, if we have a deficit on CARES, and we can extinguish that deficit because we have ESSER funds, that's if we just assume they're eligible, and then, but then we don't have ESSER to solve fiscal '24, so there's just so many moving pieces, and that's what makes it kind of difficult to really. And I know what you want, I know what you need, and I feel bad that I can't give it to you yet. And I know you're clamoring for data and information, and this is kind of, I get it, and just I want to be tight on it. So if and when this all becomes public, like, not that it's already not public, but like, I want to be, if Brockton has a deficit, I want it to be able to be fully defended on how it got there and how we solved it or tried to solve it. Because if the state's going to come in and try to do some assistance, we need to be pretty tight.
To follow on with that, if I might, because I think we need to draw a clear distinction, though, between FY23 and FY24, because the FY23 deficit was revealed to us after the fiscal year had closed. The opportunity we have now is that we have not closed the fiscal year, and TJ tonight identified sources of funds that exist and things that we can do to mitigate that, to reduce that significantly. We don't know if that's to zero or slightly more or slightly less, but what we do know is that, as TJ mentioned, there are circuit breaker funds. We're going to try to work with DESI to access the IDEA funds. There are other funds on hand. There are things we can do, like that strategic hiring, where of those 150 vacancies, we are judicious about which ones we fill and at what rates. And so the really important distinction is that the reason why we're having this detailed discussion is because we've been working very, very hard on coming up with a plan to address that, have the option to do what we did last year, because it will bankrupt the city. So we need to come up with plans to fix that as best as we can between now and June 30th, and that's what we're working toward. And that's what we'll need your support, perhaps in forms of policies. We certainly have Dr. Cobb's on board to make some of the tough decisions that he has to make, but that's the kind of thing that our team, our cross-functional city and school team, is working on every day.
So, when we look, I just want to go back. When you talk about utilizing our funds that we have on hand to try to deplete this FY24 deficit that we don't even know what number it is, so 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 million, I don't know. That circuit breaker is going to affect us for our next fiscal year budget as well. But then when I look at last year's budget, when this actually was presented to the city council, is, TJ, you said we have 5.9 million in ESSA funds that was left over?
5.19.
5.19. So that's not even reflected on this, because I know I asked specifically how much ESSA funds we had left, and I told we were at 0. But then you're telling me now that we had 5.1 million, but that's not even reflected into this budget. So it kind of questions me, why would you leave that off and not provide it to the school committee that we had those funds available? Because those ESSA funds, that's at the discretionary of the school committee how we want to use it. With everything that we got going on with schools and updating security, those funds can be used. So now we're using those funds to basically stop a massive artery bleeding that we have going on right now. I'm just trying to wrap my hand on how is that even possible. My next question is this: when we talk about Schedule 19, we voted 219. Is that Schedule 19 taken off of that 219, or is that added on top? Because if
So the 219 was the direct appropriation from the city to the Brockton Public Schools. In addition to that, there are costs that the city incurs on the city side that benefit, but those those funds are in addition to that 219.
So basically, we're using Chapter 70 for Schedule 19, correct? Tell me if I'm wrong.
It varies from year to year, but yes.
Okay. So that tells me, what was the amount? Do you know? 30-something million, 36, 38, 39 million?
I'm sorry, the amount of what?
For Schedule 19,
No. It's much more than that. TJ actually has.
on the school side. I'm not talking whole city side. So Schedule 19 is basically to cover the school side, correct? We have a certain amount that's allocated for
Yeah,
that.
the Schedule 19 is a calculation of what costs are paid for by the city that benefit public education. So it's health insurance, but there's also that $6 million figure that TJ talked about that we're trying to unravel and understand what went into that. But it can be, and generally is, the back office costs at the city, right? And so a portion of the auditing office and the law office and those sorts of things go into that calculation. Retiree health insurance. The city, because it was the tradition, carries an amount in the public property budget that is specifically for school maintenance. And so when our skilled crafts people come over here to fix things, it's paid for out of that line in the public property budget, but it goes towards the Schedule 19, so, because it counts towards the city's contribution. So we can share it with you.
I just want to know, so if I'm reading this right, so they have it listed here, ordinary maintenance, so that's $39 million, give or take. So it'd say 36, because 36 was FY '23, which is the overall budget. So that means we're paying these services out of our Chapter 70. So basically, 219, it wasn't really 219 that we gave education. We only gave them 182 million, 183 million.
I think you're calculating it in the reverse, Mr. Rodriguez. It's actually the 219 plus all the other money that we contribute. So we have to, DESE audits that on a yearly basis, and we'll get a letter. If we're not meeting the minimum contribution required by DESE, they'll send us a letter, and we have to explain it. So again, the 219 is the direct appropriation. So that's for ease of explanation, we cut a check to the school department for that amount. In addition to that, we spend money out of the city budget that benefits the school district. And the best example of that is health insurance. So all of the health insurance costs for every city employee, schools and municipal, is paid for out of the city budget. But much of that, and for tonight's discussion, we'll say estimated at $30 million a year, is paid for the benefit of school employees. But you don't see that in your budget, because in the budget that the city council appropriates, that cost is embedded in there. But it's in addition to the direct aid that we provide to the schools.
So therefore, that 30 million should have been on top of the 219.
But it is, and it's counted. We get credit for that. And I'm happy to sit down with you and go over this in detail. But I'm quite certain in this. We don't give you the money and then pull some back to pay the other bills. We give you the money and then spend more money on things that are appropriate expenses for the district.
I would like to see that breakdown, because the way I'm looking at it is that it's built in with the 219, not in lieu of.
Yeah, it's not. I can assure you of that.
Okay.
TJ, you want to pinch hit on this one?
No, but I can share the calculation for fiscal '24 and what the base calculation for fiscal '25, and how it works for every school district, and well, at least net school spending districts, because there's some stuff that's above net school spending. But I can certainly show you, because there's a lot more that goes into it than just those things: charter assessments, charter tuition, all those things that are all part of the calculation. That it'll make a ton of sense if you have a chance to let us show you it.
No, no, we have to we have to. It's not, we need to understand how that affects what we vote for, our next, fiscal year budget. It's not about level funding the school district. It is actually properly funding our school district. Me looking at what we have to fund, tell me if I'm wrong, we're looking at $350 million, $370 million for Brockton Public Schools? Is my numbers off, or am I
Net
way
school spending
above
for-
that?
Net school spending for fiscal '24 is $314 million for Brockton Public Schools. And then there's a calculation that gets it to a certain appropriation based upon, and I can walk through all that, with you. And that all comes from DESI. That's
Okay.
not from me. That's all DESI's saying. So this committee should actually truly understand how that school spending is calculated, and it's unfortunate that the committee doesn't understand, and I don't mean that in a negative way, in the sense of you are not trained in it, or it wasn't discussed with you. But this should be presented. This should not be new. The calculation should not be new. It should not be mythical. It should not be, it's straight math. It is straight formula, and it's all the appropriate way that it's done. And I will have to present to this committee, because it's important to know. Because when you take your enrollment of 16,000 plus students, you take the amount of municipal growth factor and required contribution of, 50 plus million that the city has to come up with to meet, and then they backfill the rest of Chapter 70. That's how the formula works, and that's how they estimate how much it costs to educate a youth in Brockton. And it should not, it should not be something that this committee has never seen before. You should have seen it every year to understand how the calculation is made, understand how Schedule 19 was calculated, understand how the insurance numbers play in, understand all that. And I'll commit to doing a training and/or a presentation publicly of how it's done, so the public can see how it's done, because that's the important piece that's the biggest piece of the puzzle, is where do you start with your appropriation?
No, I agree with
That's
that.
what the disconnect often ends up being.
The public does need to understand how education is funded, so they can get an understanding of how there's a lot of moving parts. Real quick, because I know Congressman just raised his hand, that 314 is separate from transportation, or is transportation included in that 314? And on top of that,
That is separate. That is
So
that is the amount.
340 million.
That's the city amount plus Chapter 70 required. That's the foundation budget that is required to be met on behalf of Brockton Public Schools. Then you net down charter school. You net down Schedule 19. You net down the 30. We'll say 30, but it's rounding of health insurance for health insurance for employees, then retiree health insurance. Then you add back in school transportation, the charter tuition reimbursement that revenue you get, and adult education, and that gives you your appropriation.
Yeah, that Schedule 19 is what's concerning to me. When I asked if that was embedded in there, and you just said when you deduct that, that gives you.
It's
you
6
might-
million, it's roughly 6 million, and it is embedded in the number because that's allowable under city service in support of schools, and I literally just don't know how it was calculated. And so I think it's time to rebuild it.
The Congressman's,
Congressman Lynch?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. TJ, I would love the opportunity to either send my staff or participate in that training. It would help me. It's been, almost 25 years since I served in legislature, but the funding, there's certain similarities to when I was there, but it's changed a little bit. The question I had for you was on the CARES Act, the 4 million that you're talking about. Is there programmatically some way to ask for forbearance or, claim hardship that might give us a waiver or relief from that?
So that is a great question. That is so DOR gave the city of Brockton a pass on CARES because it doesn't technically need to be closed out yet. Even though it's over and the program's over, they still hold out hope that there may be other issues or other solutions, that could solve some of that problem. And we haven't gotten there yet to sit there and say, all I know is the system says CARES 1 was 1.8 million deficit and CARES 2 was 1.4 million of ineligible expenses as determined by whoever determined it, the Plymouth County or whoever it was. So long answer to your short question is there might be, and I keep getting reminded that Plymouth County actually was the conduit for CARES money for the South Shore in Brockton.
That's right.
The state was that for everybody else. They all gave it to the state. So excellent question. That's all stuff we need to follow up on in the next, couple of months to say, are there other ways we can look at this? Or, does Plymouth have a surplus that we can apply to it?
Yeah, we're still, we are still going around. They're nice enough to invite me, Plymouth County, since it's federal money. So we are still going around to towns and awarding checks, sizable checks to towns because there's still money left. And
So I think that's a conversation.
Yeah, we have some friends, in the county commissioner's office. They're all very supportive of Brockton. So like to give that a try. I think, look, Brockton was the most heavily hit community during COVID. So we have sort of got a little bit of a halo around us because of the burden that we carried that other communities did not. So it seems counterintuitive that we would be penalized, because in the midst of that we went a little bit over. But I'm happy to talk to Greg Hanley and the members of the Plymouth County commissioners and see what we can do about getting some relief on that end. Try to reduce that as much as possible. Maybe get it to go away, but give it a try.
That'd be great, because that's only going to impact the city's bottom line when they're setting free cash in the tax rate next year. So
Okay. That's all I got. Thank you.
Okay, I'm looking at the time and just wondering if anybody else has any other questions for TJ. Mr. Chairman?
I just had one question, TJ. I know you said you'd be able to give us kind of like a packet or suggestions or a roadmap. We meet as a regular school committee meeting again on March 5th, on Tuesday, March 5th. We're having a special next week, but could you just tell us, because, time is of the essence, right? Put the cards on the table. We got 4 months to go. That's nothing. So how much time do you and your team need to be able to come back to us, give us some more hard numbers? Does March 5 seem, we're already getting into March then, but does March 5 seem like a reasonable expectation?
So, yeah, I would argue that is. My key piece to this, and I need to firm up the numbers, and I need to brief DESE.
Yep.
I need to brief the Executive Office of Administration and Finance, the Executive Office of Education, and potentially the Lieutenant Governor, and maybe the Governor, but I don't know. So I need them to be in the loop on everything that has occurred from our perspective, but I fully recognize and appreciate the speed in which we need to do our work, and the information that this committee needs to make decisions to move forward. So the soonest I could do it, I will be ready and able.
Okay.
And I would argue as long as that happens, or that as long as I can talk to the appropriate folks at the state, whether it's in a big meeting or a little meeting and one-on-one or just phone calls, whatever it may be. I thought it was great that Commissioner Riley reached out to you today,
Yes, me too.
Mayor, because I think that shows that Brockton's on their mind in a positive way, of they understand the problems and the challenges. If I can get over that hurdle and the numbers, even if they're not firm, I'll present as they exist and just caveat the areas where I need to caveat it. And I think all those things need to kind of come together very quickly, given the decisions that are going to need to be made between now and fiscal '25.
Okay, so we won't book that now, but, I mean, we'll be in touch, and just real quick again, on those one-to-one contracts, I know you've met with the cabinet, you meet on a regular basis with Dr. Cobbs. Do you think it just makes sense to have Dr. Cobbs do an analysis of, like, what has to be in effect going forward versus what doesn't? Dr. Cobbs, oh, you are, okay, cool, all right, good. No further questions. Again, I just want to thank Congressman Lynch for his time tonight, his insights and his dedication, and, working on the federal level and also working with our colleagues in Plymouth County. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, TJ.
Thank you.
Thanks, TJ.
Thank you.
Madam
everybody.
Chair,
Thank you.
If I could make
Thanks for
one
allowing
final
me to
comment
come.
about the
Thank you.
one-on-one contracts to follow on with what the mayor was saying, because I think one of the things that TJ and I learned in meeting with the cabinet is people pay attention to the things that we say here, and so we need to be clear. So it certainly has not been said by TJ or me, or I believe anyone, that all of the people that are employed through those one-on-one contracts need to go away, right? No, I know you weren't saying that, Mayor, but I'm offering this clarification so that the employees that are watching understand that. What I think we are, and what I am certainly saying, is that all of those employees don't need to be represented through individual contracts, and that most public organizations have employees at will that do great jobs and are compensated very well, but aren't engaged with a contract. And here, some of those contracts provide compensation and additional benefits that are real significant cost centers. So I think what we're suggesting we look at very closely is what are the costs to the district for those contracts, and how can we maintain the services and the people that are provided under those contracts without all those additional costs. So I didn't want anyone to come away from this meeting tonight thinking that the school committee is saying we should get rid of 125 people that are covered under those contracts, because I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but that's certainly what we're recommending. What we are saying, though, is to have that many people under those contracts is extraordinary, and we need to take a close look at those costs.
Agreed, fair enough. Mr. Rodriguez?
I just want to make this, ask TJ one more, and Troy, if you want to chime in on this. When you look at the amount of funding, Chapter 7 at the City of Brockton, it's increased year after year after year after year. 3 major lawsuits to address funding that the City of Brockton filed, and we won every single one of them. It's crazy that we're even sitting here having this discussion about funding, knowing that we were the leaders in actually getting extra funding and being at the forefront for the Student Opportunity Act, and the leaders of those lawsuits is here dealing with the financial issue. And it goes to show, some of us made a request. I hope the governor is watching, or a team, to address that. But I think when it comes to the safety and security of the district, I am 150% on top of filing another lawsuit to make sure that we get some extra funding for security for the district. Let's be the leader in that. We're 3-0. And I don't think we're going to be 3-1. It's going to be 4-0. And there'll be a lot of districts that will jump on board to go with that. Knowing that 20 million plus deficit, 24, do we see a reduction? Do we see a reduction in staffing for our next fiscal year. How do we avoid that? And what is the magic number? I'll put it out there, I will not support any budget that is going to lay off any educators moving forward. And I hope this committee backs me and we stand together and make sure that we add more educators to our classroom and more staffing to this district. It's not just the committee, it's the city owes it to the students of the city of Brockton. So TJ, do we see a reduction in staffing moving forward?
We're not there yet in terms of, I think that's where the fiscal 24 decisions need to be made. I wouldn't sit here and say we see one. I think that's just, we gotta let the numbers bear out. We have the governor's numbers. We have the required contribution that the city's gone up by over 3 million. We have, Chapter 70 that's gone up by, just over 15 million. We have all the assessments and all the stuff we talked about. So I can't sit here with a crystal ball and say that we will or won't even. I don't want to. There are a series of decisions that need to be made now that can really help set the district up for success down the road. And I think we should Brockton should talk to the House for when that comes out in April, and the Senate for when the Senate budget comes out in May, and reconcile against conference committee in June, and advocate for additional resources and or grants. There's I believe there's a pothole fund for circuit breaker that there's certain parameters that if Brockton meets, they can get access to some other funding. So there's still tools in the toolbox. So I don't want it to be all doom and gloom. I think that's what the roadmap or the path to balance and path to all that needs to be kind of looked at holistically.
Okay, any final questions for TJ? Ms. Azak?
Thank you. Just a couple of items. So one, TJ mentioned he would come and do like a workshop or something, or present and do some training. So I think you can never have too much training. So I like the way that TJ's doing things, his perspective. So if we can schedule that, we do schedule out through our calendar, if we can just get that scheduled. And then the other item is, while we're discussing this, pick a date. If we need to, our council is here, if we need to go into executive session to review a list of those contracts. I know Mr. Clarkson had mentioned, we don't want to alert some of those employees that have the one-on-one, but we just want to see who has them, who needs them, and just get a list of it to see how many end this year, how many are, 1, 2, 3-year contracts. I'm not even sure. So if we can get that executive session scheduled to keep the confidentiality of the contracts, but for us as a committee to see where we are, because that's going to help us with our budget as well, to see what our numbers are and where we stand as far as renewing contracts and things like that. So those are the two. If we can get those scheduled, we have 4 months left, but we have a lot of work to do. And we should not be going any weeks without a meeting, let alone maybe 2 meetings. We have a lot to get done, and this is what we signed up for. So we definitely have to get some things done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could, if
Absolutely.
nobody objects, we'll put executive session on for March 5, regular school committee meeting. Attorney Spotterfoot, does that sound okay? All right, you'll be here for that night. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, TJ, very much. Have a great night. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, everyone. We'll talk
Thank you,
soon.
TJ.
Let
Have
me
a
know
good
if you
night.
need anything.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, Sam. Forgot about that. Okay, moving on to number 5, really quick. So number 5 is the fiscal year 2025 discussion in preparation with the City Chief Financial Officer, Troy Clarkson, and Interim School Business Administrator, Patricia Boyer. I know we just put in an executive session on March 5th, but I was going to recommend us putting on a meeting at 6 o'clock before the regular school committee for another finance for us to actually start the fiscal year 25. And at the same time, we might be able to have an update from TJ Plant. And so I just want to go around the room and see if anybody objects to that. But I think, to your point, Ms. Azak, that it's going to require a few additional meetings for us to be able to hash this out. And to Mr. Rodriguez's point, like, we really need to start talking about what does cost containment look like for us. And I'm not comfortable digging into that until we have Mr. Plant's final numbers, because I think some of it is speculating at this point. But I do think that we have to look at what are areas that we can cut immediately and what are areas are like the worst possible scenario. But at least start talking about, how we're gonna try to dig out of this on our own in the next 4 months. Does that sound fair? Any questions?
So just summarization, so March 5, 6 o'clock FinCom,
Yep,
and then 7 o'clock regular with an executive session.
correct. And in the regular meeting, we'll schedule TJ for an update.
Okay.
Does that sound okay to everybody? All right, well, at this point, I would entertain an adjournment. Oh, what do I have to do with Tim? Oh, Tim, did you have a question? That was me. What do I have to do with Tim? Tim, did you have a question that I missed?
Yeah, but I'll ask it later.
Are
Kathy.
you sure? I feel so bad. Are you
Yeah.
sure?
I was, well, it's for TJ, he's already gone.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, we'll make sure that you have some voice time with TJ at the next meeting.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Tim, also, this is Bob, just if you do have a question for him that can't wait, he is very good at returning calls and emails as well. So if there's a question you want to ask him, feel free to reach out.
Absolutely. And so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. We had a motion to adjourn from Ms. Sullivan. Do I have a second? Second for Mr. Rodriguez. I'm going to do a roll call because Tim is on Zoom. So Ms. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman? Ms. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Ms. Azak?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yeah.